Hello, friends. This is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the podcast where I sit down and chit-chat with other writers of all backgrounds, writers of all types of fiction and nonfiction. And we mostly talk about the journey. We talk about a little bit about the craft. We rarely talk about any particular books. So if you're a writer and you are looking for kind of just to listen to how other writers have done it in their careers, this is the podcast for you. Before we get started, just a note, a couple websites for you to check out. You can check out carterwilson.com if you want to look at my new book, Tell Me What You Did, which is doing great. I'm very excited. That's my 10th novel. You can also sign up for my newsletter, check out other episodes of Making It Up. And if you're an aspiring writer, go ahead and go to unboundwriter.com, which is my writing company where I do one-on-one coaching. I have online classes, and I also offer seminars and retreats. I've got a couple seminars coming up this spring, one live in Denver, Colorado, and one online. And it's all about committing to your novel and really focusing on novel writing, not only from a craft perspective in terms of how I do it, but from a psychological perspective, talking about writer's blocks, fear of success, fear of failure, fear of rejection, all that good stuff. All right, without further ado, let me tell you who I talked to today. I talked to Tess Gerritsen, so you probably know that name. I talked to Tess several years ago. Out of all of my episodes, that was the one episode that the file was corrupted. I'm hoping that's not the case now. I'm actually downloading the file as we speak, so hopefully it'll be all nice and clean by the time I am able to recover it. Unfortunately, I lost that conversation from 4 years ago, so I was glad to be able to catch up with her again. So Tess is the New York Times and internationally best-selling writer of 30 novels. Yes, that's right. 30 novels. So she started life, she started her professional life as a physician, went to Stanford University and then went to medical school at the University of California in San Francisco. And when she was on maternity leave is when she wrote her first novel, as you'll hear in the episode. She always wanted to be a writer, but was rightfully told by her father that was not a good way to make a living. So she became a doctor instead. But 30 novels later, she's doing pretty well for herself as a writer. So she's got a lot of great advice. And we really kind of get into the nitty gritty of finding inspiration, figuring out how you're going to write, how your writing has to, or maybe you buck industry trends, but the pressures of the industry for sure we discuss. So, and just about what is it, you get to a certain level, Tess is at a very high level in terms of being a recognized and well-published author. What do you want to do next? How long are you going to do this for? Do you still have the passion for it? So she's very honest and open with her answers, and we had a very candid conversation. It was fantastic. So I regret that I don't have that conversation from 4 years ago, but I'm thrilled that I got to speak to her again. You're going to love this one, folks. This is my engaging conversation with Tess Gerritsen. But I know you have the summer guests that's coming out in just about a month, right?
Yeah, March 18th.
How long did that one take you to write?
That took me about a year.
Okay.
It takes me about a year. Yeah, but I feel like I'm slowing down because I've got so many other things going on right now.
Well, yeah, so that's kind of encouraging to hear because I'm about a book a year person, and depending on who I talk to, sometimes I feel like that's a slow pace, which seems crazy. It's like to write a book a year, I think it's fast.
And it's a lot of stress too. This is why I've kind of pulled away from having too many strict deadlines. I mean, I would prefer to write a book, turn it in, and then sign the contract.
That's what I do.
Yeah, it's not hanging over your head. It just feels like you have a lot more, you have more in control of your life.
Right.
But once that deadline is on the calendar and it's coming, it kind of freaks me out.
So let's dig into that a little bit though. Like, why couldn't you? Because you get to a certain level where writers have no confidence, but after a certain point in time, you're like, okay, people have bought enough of my books that if I write a book, I'm pretty sure a publisher is going to buy it. And then at your level, why wouldn't you just say, I don't want to commit to a 3 book deal. I want to commit, or I want my deadlines to be fluid.
There is a practical aspect to it from the publisher's point of view. I mean, from my
Sure.
point of view, it doesn't matter. I,
Right.
I just want to take my year and a half to write the book or a year if I'm, rushed. But the publisher likes to have those books on the calendar. They like to have the pre-order up there so that people can see, oh, there is a book coming out in a year and a half. Let's order it now. So you start accumulating the pre-orders way before the book is finished. So that's really why
Got
they
it.
push or contracts. Yeah.
Okay. And people need to understand that when they say a year and a half to write a book, it's not like you're sitting there 8 hours a day trying to write this next book for a year and a half. You'd have 12 books done if, at that pace.
Yes.
You're dealing with books that are coming out. You're making edits to books that you've just turned in. You're doing podcasts. You're traveling. You're doing events. So it's hard to stay in that zone on one book for any length of time. Does that ring true for you?
Absolutely. I mean, it's we have a life to live. We're not chained to
Right.
our desks necessarily. And for me, especially the writing process is very I would say it's chaotic. If I could just say I'm going to plot this book out for this month and then I will write the book for the next 6 months, that'd be great, but I don't do it that way. I just say, "Oh, I have an idea. Let's see where it goes."
Right.
And because I'm always writing myself into blind alleys, or I go one way
Right.
or the other way, and I change the plot and I change the villain. It does mean that I don't really know how the book is going to turn out from the beginning till the end. So
Right.
it takes me a lot of time to meander around a lot. But you're
Well,
right. There's also life to live.
and I'm the exact same way. And we have this discussion all the time about plotters versus pantsers. And I think it's ridiculous for anyone to say it has to be done this way because it has to be organic to your nature. And I think you
Mhm.
need to try different things to figure out what that nature is. But I'm starting something new, and and I'm like, okay, let me at least plot out what I would think would be the first third of the book, and I
Right.
just simply can't do it. And so once I start writing, things come to me, and I think I never would have thought of this if I were outlining, right? So I'm convinced the outline is actually in your head. It's in your subconscious, and it's just you need to physically start writing for it to reveal itself to you.
That is so right. I mean, I try to do an outline. In fact, this book that I'm working on now, which is the third in the Martini Club series, I tried to outline that. I tried so hard, and I got within about 40 pages, it all went haywire. So
But that's actually that's farther than I would have thought. Like me, it's like 10 pages. You just think of something more interesting.
yeah, right. It takes a turn, and all of a sudden, instead of having it all happening in the fictional town of Purity, my characters are off in Amsterdam. So you just
Right.
have no idea what they're gonna do, where they're gonna go, or what they're gonna say. But when they say that magical thing that twists the plot, very much a gift.
Right. And therein lies, I think, the joy of writing for the pantser is that act of discovery because you don't know what you're working towards. And you as long as you have faith that there will be something interesting, I just haven't thought of it yet.
Mhm.
Then when it happens, you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. No one's going to see this coming because I didn't see it coming.
Well, I think the most important thing for me, I mean, and this is one thing I do have planned ahead of time, and that is the emotional arcs of people. For
Okay.
instance, I mean, I know at the beginning that this next book is going to be about an old lover that comes back into the life of one of my spies, and she's married. So there's that push and the pull of, oh my God, this handsome man is back in my life, and I'm married to this man. What's going to happen? So I knew what the emotional thing was going to happen. How she would decide what she does decide by the end of the book. I didn't know how what were the various plot things that were going to propel this emotional journey. So I think you have to know what your characters are feeling, first of all.
I can't agree with you more. People say what's more important, character development or plot? I'm like, it has to be emotion forward because no, who cares about all of those other things if you're not emotionally
Yeah,
invested in your characters?
right.
And it sounds like, we're similar in the sense that I sit down to write something. I may have a vague idea, but I have a real strong sense of the mood, the tone, the emotion. This is a book of maybe anger. And I don't know how that's going to come out, but I know that that's the tone of
Mhm.
it. And it sounds like maybe with this book, I mean, introducing an ex-lover, brings up a lot of different emotions on
Yes.
for several different characters. And so, did you kind of sit down and think like, I really want to see my character squirm a little bit through this?
Well, what I wanted to see, first of all, if there were one emotion that I would use, the word I would use as the emotional journey, it's longing. It's
Hmm.
long what could have been. Um, but the other emotion is her poor husband, who's just been a wonderful man. He's jealous. He doesn't know how to deal
Of
with the fact
course.
his wife is being pulled into the past, and he has to prove himself. So in a way, it's also like, proving that you're worthy of being married to this incredible woman. So
Hmm.
it's that push and pull. I mean, there's so many things that my characters are feeling, and I don't care how I get to that point. I mean, I don't care who the spy is or who the bad guy is or, how many bullets are fired. I just want to get to that pure feeling of these three people and how it's going to end for them.
Right, because the flying bullets nobody cares about unless they care that we want these characters to be okay, or we want this relationship to be fine, or we
Yeah.
want her to go with her ex, or whatever it is. Do you
Well,
have go ahead?
yeah. No, I was going to say that is exactly what I keep telling people who write thrillers. I said, nobody cares about the bullets.
No.
Nobody cares about the guns. And
Right.
when I see somebody like just going crazy about the guns or the ammo or something, I think that I check out as a reader. I don't
Yeah.
care.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and but depends. Like if you're writing a military thriller, that's one thing, and that's a different audience. I'm a big believer in with both sex and violence that they should be used sparingly. And somebody reads your book, and they might reflect that this was a really dark, violent book. Oh, but actually, the violence was very limited when you think about it because
Mhm.
you've made it impactful, meaningful. It propels the story. It has consequences.
Yeah.
And because that drives me nuts when there's just violence on every page and no one's getting hurt and someone gets shot in the leg and they keep running. I'm like, no, no, that
Oh,
doesn't work like that.
no, and it's something that I try to explain to when I read a lot of, galleys, things like that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I always pay attention to what is it that connects me, and it's very seldom the violence.
yeah,
People say my books are really violent, but they really aren't because you
yeah.
don't you don't see a lot of blood and guts. I mean, except on the autopsy room, and that's not violent. That's
Right. It's clinical.
people. It's clinical. Um, I think they think it's violent because they are undergoing the emotions of the characters, and it feels like violence to them personally
Right.
because people are feeling these things or they're feeling the horror, but they may not actually be seeing the bloodshed.
Because
So
you've put that emotion forward.
right, right, right.
Right.
The trauma is all emotional. The trauma is not actually physical to these readers.
Right. Right. And I think that comes from a place as a writer of being a deeply empathetic person yourself and I think it also depends on what POV you're writing in. If you're writing first person present tense, which is my tendency, I do think
Mhm.
you have to be fairly empathetic to like really display what that person's feeling and maybe as few words as possible, but really have that mood of their emotions, rather than this omniscient point of view where it's a little
Yeah.
bit more this is what's happening, but not so much the feeling.
Well, it's funny because I used to teach this course with Michael Palmer, for doctors who want to become writers, and I would
Mhm.
always take them to this point of view exercise. Whose point of view is this scene from? And the old wisdom is you take the point of view of the person who has the most to lose. That
Mhm.
was the old advice, and I always tell them, I don't agree with that. It's you take the point of view of the person who has the most internal conflict because that's what we're
Mhm.
in. So I have them do a point of view where uh, a boss has to fire a well-loved and very um, loyal employee. Now, the person who has the most to lose is that employee because he's about to lose his job. But the person who has the most internal conflict is the boss. And
Right.
so when you write that scene from the boss's point of view, it feels painful. When you
Right.
write it from the employee's point of view, yeah, it's painful, but there's not that conflict that's going
Right.
through them.
It's more interesting from the boss's point of view to the reader
Right.
because that
Right.
conflict is interesting.
Yes.
How many point of views would you usually say you write in one book?
I try not to go more than four.
Okay.
Right now, I'm probably running about three because they're my two main characters are, this female spy, Maggie Bird, and the local police woman,
Right.
Joe Thibodeau. But there's always a third kind of a guest star that comes in,
The B
that comes
story.
into the novel. Yeah, the B story, except that ends up ending up very often the A story.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. Do you, how do you get past just for right in the advice column? You multiple POVs. One of the things that's incredibly difficult to do, I think, is to have the voices sound disparate
Yeah.
and without being cartoony about it, right? Like giving somebody an accent or something like that. Do you feel like you've changed over time in terms of your ability to do that, or is that ever a struggle for you at all?
It's always hard. It doesn't get any easier. I think what helps is if you give them a different socioeconomic status.
Hmm.
Uh, because somebody who's struggling to put food on the table is going to be thinking differently from somebody who doesn't.
Right.
And for at least with the Spy Coach series, it helps that one of my characters is a local girl, a good Maine girl who's now a cop.
Right.
So she's familiar with this milieu. This is her town, and she's not quite comfortable with outsiders. And then you have the opposite point of view, which is Maggie Bird, my spy who's lived abroad, who's very, she knows what it is to live in the world outside. So she's gonna speak differently. She's gonna eat differently. Everything is going to be different in their lives, and that conflict between them is really the fun of the book.
Yeah, and you have to just make sure you're, I guess, checked in enough with those different points of view that you feel like you can represent their experience. And I think that's what sometimes is hard. And I think the other thing is not to overthink it, because I tend to write from a first person present tense female point of view,
Mhm.
and I love it because it's not me. And that's exciting to me to be in another person's head. But it's easy to start saying, like, well, am I so distant from this person that I don't know what decision she would make? And I think it's easy to trip yourself up and be like, just trust the story that's in there. Trust that she's acting as a human would act because she's, yeah, has this massive event occurring to her. Um, but do you switch it up? Do you write from really different points of views other than your own?
I'm trying to think about what the most different point of view was for me. It was probably the point of view of a 12-year-old Russian boy.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's pretty far away.
that was pretty far away. And yet what's interesting is that when you get that far out of your own skin, sometimes it's easier to write.
Right. Was he
Because when
living in Russia at the time
yes,
that you were? Wow.
it
So
starts
that's
with the
really
Moscow.
like, that's really putting yourself out there.
But I've also, I mean, I've written from the point of view of a 16-year-old teenage hooker.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that the further they are away from you as a person, it almost feels as if the more fluid the writing becomes because now you're diving as an actor. You're really, some of us, so much of this is like being an actor. Getting
Totally.
into a character that's completely not you, and you have the freedom to explore this new personality. See, when I write from a point of view of somebody who's like me, like Maura Isles, I have a harder time because I consider myself so boring. I mean,
Right.
personally,
Right.
it's like nobody wants to hear what I want to say, but they might want to hear what that 12-year-old boy in Moscow wants to say.
Right.
And so it just flows better.
It does. And I mean, one of the reasons I switched from writing predominantly a male point of view is in my early books, like I would have people who knew me say, oh, you sound just like the guy sounds just like you. And that wasn't an insult, but to me, I'm like, I don't like that feeling. I want this to be a different world entirely. So I just switched over and I did discover it is completely freeing. And then of course you have beta readers, agents, editors
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
can give you feedback that this makes sense or it doesn't. But you broke into writing a while ago. But what was and I know a lot of people know your background, your medical background. But what was that moment? What was that inflection point? Was writing something that had always kind of percolated in your brain, and then there was a tipping point, or was there an actual inciting incident?
Well, I always wanted to be a writer. I mean, I knew at 7 years old this was going to be my thing, but I didn't think I could make a living at it. It's writers. I just want to write no
That
matter
that
what.
was very smart thinking for a 7-year-old.
Well, my father told me, you'll never make a living at it, keep
Right.
it as a hobby. Um,
Yep.
so the inflection point was I went on maternity leave. That did it.
Yeah.
So I was working as a doctor, and my first child was born, and he was a fantastic napper. He would sleep for like 4 hours at a time. That was my chance I was home for the first time. I wasn't studying, I wasn't working, I was home with a
Right.
baby sleep. And that's when I wrote my first book.
Yeah. And how did that you had been thinking about it for so long and you probably had some germ of an idea,
Yeah.
but how was the process of writing that book? How did that compare to kind of maybe what you thought it might be?
Um, Gee, it was so long ago. I was
Right.
reading romance novels back then. I
Hmm.
had been introduced to them by one of my patients.
Hmm.
So my first book was a romance novel, and I had two that didn't go anywhere. But the third one that did get published, there was something different about that story. There was something I think I introduced. I know what it was. The very first page, I introduced a murder, and suddenly it
Hmm.
became easier. So
Right.
it must have, yeah, I think that it was that introduction of suspense, a story that opened up with an assassination. Suddenly it became easy. And I suppose that's what I always should have been writing, not romance, but suspense.
And how do you think, this is a very broad question that you've probably been asked a million times, but from my viewpoint, I feel like after about 20 years for me, I felt like I got to the point of like, okay, I kind of think I know what I'm doing. I feel comfortable teaching now, even though, again, there's a million ways to write a book. So I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I'm going to tell you how I do it. But how long did that take for you to feel like, because it doesn't usually come with the first sale of a book. You don't feel confident. How long did it feel like, oh, this is actually working? And I know there's ups and downs, but I think this is a viable career path.
Probably it was my 10th book.
Yeah, no,
You know,
totally.
by book number 10, I was starting to make money. I mean, enough money so that I could feel like, oh, I could actually ask my husband to pull back on his job.
This is
Um,
10th published book or 10th written book?
10th published book.
Yeah.
My 10th published book was the first one that hit the New York Times list. Um, before that, when you write paperback romance novels, you're not going to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's not.
And you're expected to, three a year kind of a thing for romance
Right.
novels.
It was just like so much work to actually make a living as a paperback romance novelist anyway. Um, as far as when I became comfortable, I've never been comfortable
That's good.
in the process. It's
Yeah.
just as hard nowadays as it was 30 books ago.
Yeah.
Um, in some ways, it almost feels harder because now there are expectations. Now people expect a thriller novel with thrills and chills, and
Right.
some not every book is like that. Not every book I sit down to write feels like it should be that.
Yeah, totally. And it is kind of, you still have to embrace your process as a writer and say, this is the story I want to tell. And I remember one comment you made last time we talked was like, sometimes like the books that I personally love of mine didn't do as well as the ones that I thought were okay, that they just took off and you just don't know.
Yeah.
So my 10th just came out. So it's interesting that we're having this parallel, and it was a Barnes and Noble monthly pick. So it's the first time that's happened to me. So it hit the Publishers Weekly list, and I'm like, all right, now I'm getting more attention than I've ever gotten. But why? Like, what was it about? And you start thinking like, okay, should my next book be kind of similar? Like,
Oh gosh, yes, you
and
start.
like, you got to push against that because it's ridiculous. And like, no, the next book is the book I wanted to, but you do kind of start thinking about, is there a formula there?
You can't chase sales.
You
It's
can't.
impossible. Nobody knows anything. You write the book you want to write, and I agree with you. The books that I personally love the most that I've written are the ones that did not sell that well,
Yeah.
um, because they were sometimes like off in left field. It was okay. I'm writing Rizzoli Isles, and oh, wait a minute, I want to write a ghost story, and you
Right.
go, that book does not do well, but I love that book, just as I
Right.
loved my science fiction novel that didn't do well. Um, but you don't always know what's going to sell. And for instance, I've been writing Brazilian Isles for 13 books, and I was kind of tired of the characters.
Yeah.
And I wrote this spy novel, and I don't think anybody was expecting that, and nobody really wanted it. But now it's in development at Amazon Studios for a
Yeah.
TV show. And,
It's amazing.
it sold more copies than anyone ever expected.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And you do kind of think about, and it's also a shifting zeitgeist, right? Like what's popular now or what the international mood is now is different. So, and everything's this timestamp of who you are in your life, and that's why you like certain things better. Because
Exactly.
like my kids were 10 years old. I remember exactly when I was writing this. It was a good time, and so it's kind of a fond memory there. And the book that just came out for me, I remember thinking this is an angry book, and I think that's part of it. It's just like it's an angry country, and
Yeah,
I think there's
definitely.
I think there is something. I think there's something about that. They want to see, maybe an oppressed person fighting back
Yeah.
and succeeding or whatever it is. There is tapping into something. But to your point, if you try to chase that, you're doomed because your book's not coming out for 2 years.
Yeah, you don't know what the zeitgeist will be then.
Right,
Um, and we also write what is personal to us at that moment in our lives. So,
right,
I'm a certain age. And so the Spy Coast is really, it's all about old people. It's
yeah,
about five people in their 60s and 70s. And it was the book I needed to write at that particular time. And lo and behold, there's a whole bunch of readers out there in the same age group who are going, well, there's a book about us.
right,
It's about 60-year-olds who are still having adventures. So
right.
you just don't know what's going to work, but it has to work for you.
Right. And that itself kind of goes against just the very outdated conventional wisdom is like, oh, people want to read protagonists who are in their maybe 30s, early 40s at most. And like you said, you look at the demographics of readers, preponderance are female, and definitely skews for thrillers that my observation has been skews, a bit older. Why wouldn't you write a book, about a demographic that is or massive readers of yours?
Well, I remember writing a book years ago, must have been 1998 or something, and it had a, a fair number of nursing home people in it. And when we turned it in, I just remember my Hollywood agent saying, "There are too many old people in this story." So
Go look at Cocoon.
they were not ready for that yet.
Have you, we've been talking a lot about just kind of being true to yourself, being true to the story that sits in your subconscious. But over the course of 30 books, and over the course of your success, have you ever felt like, I don't know, maybe cynical is the right word? Like I've seen the industry change to this direction. Do I want to go in this direction, or can I just keep doing what I've been doing before? Has there been those outward pressures?
Um, there's something wonderful about the book industry because I've also been dealing with the Hollywood industry as well.
Right.
I'm cynical about that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
about the book industry, the people that I've worked with in publishing, they all love books. They're all well read. They all care about books. So I think what I'm cynical about are the bean counters at the top.
Yeah.
Uh, the ones who say, "Oh my God, it's time for romantasy. Let's go find romantasy." And so they go chase this and they chase that. Um, so it's really not the editorial that ever makes me cynical. I think I've loved every one of my editors.
Yeah.
They've all been great. And I am cynical about readers sometimes. It sounds terrible, isn't it? I'm shooting my consumers
Yeah.
in the foot
Well,
here.
let's talk about that. So what about specifically?
Readers don't know what they want,
Hmm.
and until they get it, and then all of a sudden they say, "This is what I've always wanted," but they were never able to identify it. I'm also cynical about the fact that I feel readers are not, they don't read carefully, or they read superficially,
Hmm.
or they're quick to say, quick to criticize, assuming that we just sit down and we just turn this stuff
Right.
out and
Right. Right. That you're not
thought,
spending a year and a half on it.
right, right. So sometimes I do get tired of it. I look at reviews, reader reviews, so not just my books, but other people's books, and people have gotten really mean. That's it.
Yeah.
They've gotten really mean on the internet.
Yeah, and it depends on which specific site that you're looking at. I think it depends as well. I mean, I know people who won't even look at Goodreads reviews because they can be nasty, nasty, like just we get it if you don't like it, but just really personally nasty. And then you have these just amazing, passionate, always there readers who will consume your works and will give you great feedback, even if it's negative feedback. They're thoughtful about it. So there's a massive group of people like that, but it is kind of all over the place. And do you ever think about, like, as thriller writers, what connected with me was using readers sometimes don't read carefully, and I think that is obviously a symptom of just a deteriorating attention span,
The internet.
culturally.
Yes.
I mean, totally. I mean, because I write short chapters just because that's how I write. That's what feels right to me. But then I get feedback that it totally connects with people, and I think it's kind of depressing in a way, because like people are like, oh, I can do another 3 pages. I can do another 3 pages. I'm like, that's kind of the world we live in now. So if you want to go into detailed, for example, if you're describing an autopsy that goes into several pages that are important, you might not have readers that have the patience for that, like they may have 20 years ago.
Yeah, and there's too much. What do they say? TLDR, too long, didn't read. That is the way people are thinking now. And I've been watching, but where was I reading this? There was an article about how this is part of the educational system, which is too bad, is we don't encourage kids to read whole books.
Right.
Now they're allowed to read like a couple chapters, and then they go into the multimedia stuff about, well, let's explore this. Let's say what so and so says, and let's watch a little bit of this movie so you understand.
Let's watch the movie version of this book.
Right, right. I mean, why not just read the whole book?
Right. Yeah, it is kind of depressing, isn't it? And then, and even just like the expectations of a thriller writer to have, literally the first 2 pages grab you, it feels very disingenuous to me, because I think maybe now we're talking a little bit to aspiring writers, because I think obviously you're at the point now where you can this is totally guessing, but you could probably write whatever you want to write. You're not probably so bound to maybe what the conventional wisdom of rules are. But if you're a thriller writer and you think, I need to establish the stakes for this character, and that means I need to take a look at their life, and that might take 15, 20 pages before something happens.
Right.
For an aspiring writer, they're going to say, no, what I'll do instead is I'll write an action-filled prologue, which is just an empty promise, I think, most of the time, because you don't want to get back to it for like half the book. But that's kind of because editors and agents are telling them nothing happens in the first 5 pages. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think that we fall back on the idea that action is interesting.
Right. And it's not. Action is boring most of the time.
Action is boring. I've always tried to open up my chapters, not with action necessarily, but with something that leaves the reader or the character off balance. It's just this sense of, oh, there's a question here. What's going on? That is much more interesting than he shot the gun,
Right. A disorientation almost.
Disorientation, exactly. So that the first thing you think of is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Why is this character in this position right now? And it needn't have anything to do with violence.
Yeah. And is that harder to do when you're working on a standalone as opposed to a series where people they have all the baggage they know about this character whose name is mentioned in the first sentence of the book, so they bring that with them, and you don't have to establish that necessarily?
No, I think it doesn't. Either way, either series or standalones, it's equally difficult to try and pull something in on that first chapter.
Yeah.
Or the first sentence, even. The first sentence is just as important. Yeah.
Right. And it's never the same first chapter or first sentence as your draft, right? It's always like, it starts in chapter 3, I realize.
The first sentence of the book is always almost like the last sentence I write.
Yeah, right. Like what is like, and to me, it's a little bit about like, let's set the tone, not saying what the weather is, but just like a simple sentence. But if there's a little like in the character's mind, and then there's a little bit of hesitation, you immediately have this image of like this person's unsure of something. And it doesn't take much. You don't have to have these massive cliffhanger endings every chapter, and
Right,
it
right.
just has to be a little bit like, wait, what?
It's always leave them off balance. That's really the clue.
Yeah, yeah. And now, is just writing wise, again, given your resume, do you, and this point in your career, do you have the same gusto? Do you sit down like, I can't wait to write this next book?
It depends on the scene.
Yeah,
If if there's a scene I can't wait to write, then I look forward to it. But a lot of it is just oh God, I want to go out and garden instead.
yeah.
A lot of it is avoidance. I find that as I get older, I'm doing a lot of avoidance now by doing other tasks. Going back and doing another Portuguese lesson or something.
Well,
Um,
and has your writing routine changed over time in terms of the amount of you write a
yeah,
day
it
or what
has.
time?
I used to be happy doing 4 pages a day, and
Yeah,
now I'm pretty happy if I can get 3 pages a day. So I
yeah,
it's I don't know if it's that I just have more distractions, or if I need a vacation. Maybe that's what it really is.
I mean, it might be. Sometimes I just, even though I only write an hour a day, so I'm like you, I'm like 5 to 700 words a day. There is a sense of like almost like you miss physical movement sometime. Like I want, like you said, you mentioned gardening. And I think I wanted to do a house project that's going to take me 4 hours because I'm going to sand something down or whatever.
Yeah.
And you want to do that rather than just sit because you have to. It's exhausting. You are in this world and you are so forced to be fully present in the moment. And I think in order to write, that you don't realize how tiring it is, as opposed to maybe a day job where what you can do that's just enough to be fine. You can't do that with writing.
We underestimate how exhausting it is. I mean, because we're sitting there and our muscles are tensed up, or at least mine are.
Yeah,
Your neck is tired, you're looking down, you're just because that all that brain power requires a lot of energy.
it
Um,
does.
so at the end of a day when I've had a good day of writing or I've struggled a lot at the desk, and I go downstairs. I just want to drink. That's I just
Yeah,
I just
yep.
want to I just want to drink. If I have been outside gardening all day, shoveling, moving stuff around, soil here to there, I mean just expending calories, I won't feel that exhaustion.
Yeah,
I'll just
yeah.
feel
That's so
happy. I'll feel
interesting.
like what? Yeah.
It's is there and I know we're going to wrap up soon, but is there, I hate to even bring this up, but do you ever think about the idea of like, I could see the next three books being my last three books. Like, do writers retire?
I've been saying that for the last 10 books. Every time I finish a book, I think, or I'm in the middle of a book, I say, this is it. This is my last book. I'm tired. I don't know how to do this anymore. And then I finish the book and I get 2 weeks off. And then I think, oh, wait, I have another idea. And it's
Right.
that kind of thing. I have
Yeah.
failed at retirement repeatedly.
Right. Right. Because I mean, the idea of being a writer is something you can do at any age,
Right.
and you really can. And so I when I write, I'm like, well, I guess I'm just doing this for the rest of my life. But I don't know. Maybe you get to a certain point where you're like, I don't have the passion for this anymore, and that
I
certainly
think,
hasn't hit me. But
yeah, what we get tired of is either the genre we're writing or the characters we're writing about.
right,
Um, And that's what brings me back into a story. I mean, I'm finishing up now. It's a book called The Shadow Friends, and it's the third book in the Martini series. And I thought, in the midst of writing that book, I'm tired, I'm tired, I'm tired, I'm done, I'm going to retire. And I just sort of finished the first draft and was contemplating, you know, turning that in and thinking, I miss these characters already. I want to find out what happens to them next. And
oh,
that's
that's
what
interesting.
that's what pulls me into the next story is these characters. I love these characters and want to see, what happens.
Right. Although at some point you have to let them go, obviously, but it
Yeah.
might be 10 books.
It might be. Yeah, I don't want them ever to die.
Yeah. Oh, that's that's always the struggle. Well, Tess, we're going to wrap up, but before we do, we've got, and I don't know if you remember doing this 4 years ago, but it's the storytelling part. of the show. It's the making it up part of the show, which is where we impromptu tell a story using a random sentence from a random page from a random book. So I have 3 books here. You're going to choose one of them. We're going to choose that random sentence. I'm going to read that sentence. And then that's the first sentence in maybe a 2-minute long short story. So I'll read that sentence. You give me the next sentence or 2 or whatever comes to your head that happens next. Then I do a sentence or 2. And then when it completely goes off the rails, we'll call it. So this is like my 190th time doing this, and I get nervous every time. So it's okay if it's a shit show is kind of my point. I've got Alison Brennan's The Missing Witness. This is an arc from Mylan Duquang, and I apologize if I'm saying her name right. Ceylon Sapphires, I think, comes out in a few months. And Araminta Hall's One of the Good Guys. So choose one of those.
Let's take the last one.
All right, and give me a number between 1 and 280.
We should do it early in the book, shouldn't we? Let's do 27.
Sure.
27.
Right. I'm going to find... all right. There's a lot of drinking on this page.
Go ahead.
All right. I'm just going to read the sentence and you do whatever you want with it. I opened a bottle of Prosecco around 3, which was another ill-advised purchase that made me wonder what the hell my psyche had been playing at the day before.
But I decided it was time to go ahead and proceed with the Prosecco. And after I drank half the bottle, I realized I understood what this was really all about.
Was it the booze talking? I like to think that it possibly was. I prefer to think that the booze would actually wipe out my memories altogether. But in my daze, I recalled the body on the floor, crumpled over, and knowing what my role was for it getting there.
We had such a good night together too. The girl in the bar, the laughter, the jokes she told. She had eyes like sapphires, and I thought, this is the one. Maybe this is the one. And that's how we ended up in that hotel room.
I should have known when she asked for my ID that this wasn't just a normal conversation, a normal get-together. I should have also known when she leaned in to kiss me and I smelled bitter almonds on her breath that something was off. I really screwed you over there.
All my training had taught me to avoid this situation. And again, I have been able to avoid the situation. But this time I slipped up because of those eyes, because of that voice. Every man has a weakness, and she had found mine.
Well, I think we call it there. That was a beautiful wrap up. Isn't that terrible?
It's terrible. That's why first drafts always go in the trash.
I know, but it's also, that's what I love about it though too, because it is just kind of this pure, this is how my brain works and this is how your brain works. And we'll see if there's any kind of cohesion between the two, but it is pure.
Yes.
Well, Tess, it was lovely to talk to you. I'll make sure that everything works this time. And
I hope I didn't corrupt it. Yes.
Well, if you did, then at least it was corrupted by Tess Gerritsen. And I will see you in the Hamptons in a couple months.
Okay.
Right, take care. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, friends, that is it. That is my conversation with Tess Gerritsen. We had a great time. We made up a funky little potentially murder mystery story about foul play in a hotel room. She was great. I really loved talking to her. You can find out everything you want to find out about her at tessgerritsen.com. And I also want to mention that her new book, The Summer Guests, will be out just around the time that this podcast airs. So make sure to check out The Summer Guests. And you can pop on over to carterwilson.com for any of my events, buy my books, sign up for my newsletter, see other episodes of Making It Up, and head on over to unboundwriter.com if you're interested at all in my one-on-one coaching, my online classes, or my upcoming seminars and retreats. All right, friends, that is it. Another episode of Making It Up will be out just next week. I do so appreciate you watching and or listening to this. Until the next episode, take care.